Because I don't want you guys to rush in and help me at the last minute. Like, I don't want you guys to rush in and try to help.
It was 11:48 in the morning when the first frantic call reached the Coppers Cove Police Department. A neighbor's voice, shaking with panic, reported gunshots from the house on Tanner Drive. Multiple shots, close range, and then silence. What dispatchers didn't know yet was that they were about to respond to a crime that would expose the dangerous intersection between social media scandal and deadly jealousy. A case where private betrayal would explode into public humiliation, and where one man's rage would destroy an entire family. When first responders arrived at the modest home in this Texas community, they found a scene that would haunt them for years. Inside lay a 31-year-old mother of 5, multiple gunshot wounds telling the story of someone's uncontrolled fury. The woman who friends knew as vibrant, full of life, always wearing her signature pink, now motionless on her own floor. But here's what makes this case so disturbing. This wasn't a random home invasion. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was personal, devastatingly personal. And it happened in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where children play in front yards and neighbors know each other's names. Who shoots a mother of 5 in her own home at noon on a Saturday? What kind of rage drives someone to pull that trigger not once, but multiple times? And why did this happen just hours after a social media post had torn apart this woman's private life for the entire world to see? The victim's name was Shasmeen Clack, and her story isn't just about a tragic death. It's about how quickly digital exposure can turn deadly. In the weeks leading up to February 1st, 2025, Shasmeen's personal life had become public entertainment. Allegations of an affair with a popular rapper had exploded across social platforms, exposing intimate details that should have stayed private. But someone wasn't just watching these revelations unfold online. Someone was consuming every post, every comment, every detail with a growing sense of betrayal and humiliation. Someone who had access to her home, someone who knew exactly where to find her on that February morning. The shooter wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He wasn't some unknown threat that police would spend months trying to identify. The man who ended Shasmeen's life was someone she knew intimately, someone who shared the most personal aspects of her world. As we examine this case together, we're going to explore how a social media scandal became the catalyst for murder. We'll look at how private relationships can turn lethal when played out in public forums. And we'll uncover the disturbing truth about what happens when jealousy meets the permanent, unforgiving nature of the internet. What you're about to hear isn't just another crime story. It's a wake-up call about the real-world consequences of our digital age. It's about a woman whose life was reduced to gossip and speculation, and a man whose inability to handle public humiliation led to an irreversible act of violence. Before we continue deeper into this shocking case, we need to ask ourselves, what happens when private betrayal becomes deadly public spectacle? How did social media transform from a platform for connection into a weapon that destroyed lives? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you're ready to uncover the dark truth behind this tragedy, hit that subscribe button and join the Crime Vault Stories community, where we investigate cases that shake us to our core. The evidence we're about to examine will show you exactly how digital exposure can become a matter of life and death. This is the story of Shasmeen Clack, and the man who couldn't handle the world knowing his business. To understand what was truly lost on that February morning, we need to know who Shasmeen Tashawn Clack really was. Beyond the headlines, beyond the controversy, beyond the tragedy that would define her final chapter. Born on August 31st, 1993, in Kingsville, Texas, Shasmeen grew up with dreams bigger than her small-town roots. She was the kind of person who lit up rooms simply by walking into them. Her laugh was infectious, her energy magnetic, and her presence unforgettable. Those who knew her best described a woman who lived life with fearless authenticity, never apologizing for being exactly who she was. Shasmeen's journey led her from Kingsville to Austin, where she attended Del Valle High School and began building the foundation for the woman she would become. Even in her teenage years, teachers and classmates recognized something special about her. A combination of academic drive and natural charisma that set her apart from her peers. But what truly defined Shazmin wasn't her education or her ambitions. It was her role as a mother. 5 children called her mom, and by every account, they were absolutely everything to her. Her sister Chantel would later recall how Shazmin's entire world revolved around those kids. Every decision she made, every goal she set, every dream she chased was filtered through one question. How will this benefit my children? Friends remember her as the mother who never missed a school event, who always had snacks ready for unexpected friends, who could turn an ordinary Tuesday into an adventure. She had this gift for making the mundane feel magical. Whether it was a trip to the grocery store that became a treasure hunt, or a rainy afternoon that transformed into an indoor camping expedition. In her professional life, Shazmin had carved out a unique identity as Shaz the Reader. This wasn't just a nickname, it was a brand, a reputation, a testament to her intellectual curiosity and her ability to connect with people through shared stories and experiences. Her clients didn't just seek her services, they sought her wisdom, her perspective, her genuine care for their well-being. Fashion was another avenue where Shazmin's personality truly shined. She had this bold, unapologetic style that turned heads wherever she went. Pink was her signature color, not just an occasional choice, but a consistent thread that ran through her wardrobe, her accessories, even her social media presence. She understood that style wasn't about following trends, it was about expressing your inner self with confidence. Her social media following wasn't built on manufactured drama or artificial content. People followed Shazmin because she was real. Gloriously, honestly real. She shared the messy moments of motherhood alongside the victories. She posted about struggles with the same openness she showed when celebrating successes. Her authenticity in a digital world full of pretense made her genuinely beloved by those who knew her virtually and personally. Shazmin's dreams extended far beyond her current circumstances. She talked constantly about expanding her career, about creating opportunities that would provide financial security for her children's futures. She wanted to buy them a house with a big backyard, to take them on vacations they'd never forget, to give them advantages she'd never had growing up. Community involvement wasn't just something Shazmin talked about, it was something she lived. Neighbors recall her unexpected visits during difficult times. Her willingness to help with anything from babysitting to meal preparation when families were struggling. She had this instinctive understanding that small acts of kindness could create profound impacts. Her creativity wasn't limited to fashion choices. Shazmin had ideas, business concepts, community projects, ways to bring people together and build something meaningful. She possessed that rare combination of vision and practical determination that made those around her believe she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. The love her family and friends felt for Shazmin wasn't based on perfection. It was based on her genuine heart, her unwavering loyalty, and her ability to make everyone around her feel valued and important. She had flaws, like everyone, but her capacity for love and her commitment to growth made those imperfections feel insignificant. This was the woman whose life would be cut short, not just a victim, but a vibrant human being with plans, dreams, and people who depended on her presence in their world. In the weeks leading up to that fatal February morning, Shazmin's private world had become public entertainment in the cruelest possible way. What started as whispers and speculation had exploded into a full-blown social media storm that would ultimately cost her everything. The controversy centered around allegations that Shazmin was having an affair with a popular rapper known as Finesse2Times. This wasn't just neighborhood gossip or quiet speculation among friends. This was detailed, explicit information being broadcast across multiple social media platforms for thousands to see, comment on, and share. The initial exposure came through posts that appeared to contain private messages, photos, and intimate details that should never have seen the light of day. Someone with access to this personal information had decided to weaponize it, turning Shazmin's private life into a public spectacle. Screenshots of alleged conversations began circulating on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, each post garnering hundreds of comments and shares. What made this particularly devastating was the level of detail being shared. These weren't vague accusations or general rumors. These were specific incidents, dates, locations, and conversations that painted an incredibly personal picture of alleged infidelity. The posts included everything from supposed text message exchanges to claims about meetings and encounters that were described with intimate precision. The rapper's existing fanbase quickly became involved, with some defending him and others expressing outrage. Shazmeen found herself at the center of discussions happening in comment sections across multiple platforms, with strangers dissecting her choices, her character, and her personal relationships. Her name was being mentioned in posts by accounts with thousands of followers, spreading the story far beyond her immediate social circle. Within days, the story had reached people in her community who had never heard of the rapper, but now knew intimate details about Shazmeen's alleged personal life. Co-workers, neighbors, parents from her children's schools, everyone seemed to know about the accusations. The private had become painfully, permanently public. The most damaging aspect wasn't just the initial posts, but how quickly the story multiplied. People began creating their own content around the controversy. Reaction videos, opinion posts, and commentary that kept the story alive and growing. Each new post brought fresh humiliation and extended the reach of information that was destroying her personal relationships. Shazmeen's response to the online exposure was limited and strategic. She made a few posts attempting to address the situation, but quickly realized that engaging with the controversy was only adding fuel to the fire. Every response she made was screenshot, analyzed, and turned into additional content for others to comment on. The impact on her close relationships was immediate and severe. Trust became a central issue, not just because of the alleged affair, but because someone with access to her private communications had chosen to expose them so publicly. The question of who had betrayed her in this way added another layer of pain to an already devastating situation. At this moment, we're witnessing how social media can turn private pain into public ammunition. The question is, was this digital exposure the final trigger that sealed Shazmeen's fate? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Phone calls from family members began pouring in, text messages from friends asking if the allegations were true. Awkward encounters at grocery stores and school pickup lines where people stared and whispered. Shazmeen's everyday life had become a minefield of uncomfortable interactions and painful conversations. The stress was visible to those closest to her. The woman who had always carried herself with confidence and joy was now constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering who else had seen the posts, who else was talking about her private business. Sleep became difficult. Simple tasks like going to work or taking her children to school became exercises in navigating public scrutiny. What made the situation even more volatile was that the exposure hadn't just affected Shazmeen. Other people in her life were also dealing with the fallout, processing their own feelings of betrayal, humiliation, and anger. The digital exposure had created a pressure cooker of emotions that was building toward an explosive confrontation. 27-year-old Alonzo Ezekiel Hunter from Beaumont, Texas, wasn't a random stranger who had wandered into Shazmeen's life. He was the father of her youngest child, making this tragedy even more devastating for the family involved. But Hunter's connection to Shazmeen's family came with a dark history that should have served as a warning sign for what was to come. Hunter's legal record painted the picture of a man who had consistently struggled with violent impulses and poor decision-making. At the time of Shazmeen's murder, he was already out on bond for a previous assault charge, a detail that would later make investigators question why he had been free to commit this heinous act. This wasn't his first encounter with the criminal justice system, and his pattern of behavior suggested someone who had never learned to control his anger or handle conflict appropriately. Court documents revealed a man who had multiple run-ins with law enforcement over the years. These weren't minor infractions or misdemeanors. They were serious charges that demonstrated a concerning pattern of aggressive behavior toward others. Friends and family members who knew Hunter described him as someone with a volatile temper, particularly when he felt disrespected or challenged. What investigators discovered about Hunter's psychological profile was deeply troubling. Those who knew him reported that he had always struggled with jealousy and possessiveness, especially in romantic relationships. Former partners and acquaintances described incidents where Hunter had become obsessed with controlling personal situations, often reacting with disproportionate anger when things didn't go his way. Hunter's relationship with social media was particularly problematic. Unlike many people who use these platforms casually, Hunter appeared to consume online content obsessively, particularly when it involved people in his personal life. Friends reported that he would spend hours scrolling through posts, comments, and stories, often becoming increasingly agitated by what he found. The weeks leading up to the murder had been especially difficult for Hunter. Beyond dealing with his existing legal troubles and court appearances, he was now facing the public humiliation of his personal business being exposed online. The social media posts about Shazmin's alleged affair weren't just embarrassing, they were attacking his identity as a man and a father in the most public way possible. Investigators learned that Hunter had been closely monitoring every post, every comment, and every share related to the scandal. His digital footprint showed he was visiting the relevant social media pages multiple times per day, reading and rereading the content that was causing him so much emotional distress. This constant exposure to the humiliating information was clearly affecting his mental state. People close to Hunter noticed significant changes in his behavior during this period. He became more isolated, more irritable, and more prone to angry outbursts over minor issues. His sleep patterns were disrupted, and he began making concerning statements about feeling disrespected and humiliated by the situation. What made Hunter particularly dangerous was his access to firearms, combined with his deteriorating emotional state. Unlike someone who might have to acquire a weapon, Hunter already possessed the means to act on his violent impulses. This accessibility, combined with his documented history of poor impulse control, created a lethal combination. Hunter's employment history showed someone who struggled to maintain steady work, often leaving jobs after conflicts with supervisors or coworkers. This pattern of instability extended to his housing situation, his relationships, and virtually every aspect of his adult life. He was someone who seemed incapable of accepting responsibility for his actions or learning from his mistakes. The investigation revealed that Hunter had been making increasingly threatening statements in the days before the murder. While he hadn't directly threatened Shazmin, people around him reported that his anger was escalating and his comments about the situation were becoming more concerning. He spoke frequently about feeling betrayed and humiliated, and about needing to handle the situation. Hunter's previous assault charge involved a similar pattern. Someone had done something he perceived as disrespectful, and he had responded with violence. The fact that he was out on bond for this previous incident meant that the legal system had already failed to contain his dangerous behavior once. This was the man who would ultimately decide that Shazmin's life was worth less than his wounded pride. Once investigators arrived at the Tanner Drive residence, they began methodically collecting evidence that would build an airtight case against Hunter. What they discovered was a treasure trove of physical, digital, and forensic proof that would make this one of the most straightforward murder prosecutions in recent Texas history. The ballistics evidence was devastating for Hunter's defense. The bullets recovered from the scene were matched through forensic analysis to a specific firearm that Hunter was known to possess. This wasn't circumstantial evidence or educated guesswork. This was scientific proof that connected Hunter's weapon directly to Shazmin's death. The ballistics expert who testified would later state that the match was so precise that there was no reasonable doubt about the weapon's identity. But the physical evidence was just the beginning. Investigators quickly discovered that Hunter had left a digital trail that documented his movements and state of mind leading up to the murder. His smartphone contained a series of increasingly angry text messages and social media interactions that showed his emotional deterioration in real time. These digital communications were particularly damning because they showed Hunter's specific reactions to the online posts about Shazmin's alleged affair. Investigators found evidence that he had been screenshotting the posts, saving them to his phone, and sending them to other people along with his angry commentary. His messages revealed someone who was becoming more unhinged with each passing day. Security camera footage from a nearby convenience store provided crucial visual evidence of Hunter's presence in the area at the time of the murder. The timestamp on this footage placed him in the immediate vicinity just minutes before the first emergency call was made. More importantly, the footage showed him leaving the area shortly after the estimated time of death, driving erratically and at high speed. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured additional footage that proved essential to the prosecution's case. This video showed a vehicle matching Hunter's car parked near Shazmin's residence earlier that morning, demonstrating that this wasn't a spontaneous act, but rather a planned attack. The neighbor had been reviewing their security footage for an unrelated reason when they noticed the suspicious vehicle and contacted police. Hunter's capture at a nearby hotel provided investigators with a wealth of additional evidence. When police located him, his behavior was described as highly agitated and suspicious. He was found with personal belongings that included drafts of angry messages on his phone that he had apparently written but never sent. These messages contained violent language and specific threats that showed his murderous intent. The hotel room search yielded clothing with what appeared to be gunshot residue, though Hunter attempted to claim he had been target shooting earlier that week. However, investigators were able to prove through witness testimony that Hunter had not been to any shooting ranges, making his explanation impossible to substantiate. Phone records revealed that Hunter had made several attempts to contact Shazmin on the morning of the murder. These calls went unanswered, and investigators believe this rejection may have been the final trigger that pushed Hunter to carry out his violent plan. The frequency and timing of these calls showed someone who was becoming increasingly desperate and aggressive. Hunter's internet search history in the days leading up to the murder was particularly disturbing. Investigators found that he had been researching topics related to crime scene investigation, legal consequences for murder, and even methods for avoiding detection. These searches demonstrated premeditation and showed that Hunter understood the gravity of what he was planning to do. Perhaps most damaging of all was Hunter's own social media activity immediately after the murder. Despite attempting to appear normal, his posts and comments showed someone who was clearly under extreme stress. He made several contradictory statements about his whereabouts and activities that day, creating inconsistencies that investigators were able to exploit during questioning. The forensic examination of Hunter's vehicle revealed additional evidence linking him to the crime. Investigators found traces of evidence that placed him at the scene, along with items that suggested he had attempted to clean or dispose of evidence after the fact. When all of this evidence was compiled, prosecutors had built a case that was virtually impossible to refute. The combination of physical evidence, digital records, witness testimony, and Hunter's own contradictory statements created a complete picture of premeditated murder that would ultimately convince a jury beyond any reasonable doubt. When Alonzo Hunter's trial began, the courtroom was packed with Shazmin's family members, friends, and community supporters who had come to witness justice for a woman whose life had been stolen in the most brutal way possible. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming, presenting the mountain of evidence that had been collected during the investigation. Hunter's defense team attempted to argue that the murder had been a crime of passion rather than premeditated murder, hoping to reduce the charges and potential sentence. They painted a picture of a man who had been pushed to his breaking point by public humiliation and emotional distress. However, this strategy backfired spectacularly when prosecutors presented evidence of Hunter's internet searches and planning activities that clearly demonstrated premeditation. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all charges. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence and the clarity of Hunter's guilt. When the verdict was read, Shazmin's family members wept with relief, knowing that justice had been served for their beloved daughter, sister, and mother. Hunter's sentencing hearing provided an opportunity for Shazmin's family to address the court and share victim impact statements that revealed the true scope of the devastation he had caused. Her sister Chantel spoke about the 5 children who would now grow up without their mother, describing the impossible task of explaining to them why someone had chosen to take away the person they loved most in the world. The judge imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Hunter would never again have the opportunity to harm another person. In delivering the sentence, the judge specifically noted the premeditated nature of the crime and Hunter's complete lack of remorse throughout the proceedings. The courtroom erupted in applause when the sentence was announced, providing a moment of catharsis for those who had loved Shazmin. Beyond the individual justice achieved through Hunter's conviction, Shazmin's case sparked important conversations throughout Texas and beyond about the dangerous intersection of domestic violence and social media. Legal experts began discussing how digital platforms can amplify personal conflicts in ways that sometimes lead to real-world violence. Domestic violence advocacy groups seized on Shazmin's story as an example of how quickly private disputes can escalate when exposed to public scrutiny. They organized educational seminars and awareness campaigns that used her case to illustrate the warning signs of potentially violent situations and the resources available to people who find themselves in dangerous relationships. The community of Copper's Cove rallied around Shazmin's memory in remarkable ways. Local churches organized memorial services that celebrated her life, rather than focusing solely on her death. Neighbors who had known her established a scholarship fund in her name to help other single mothers pursue educational opportunities that could improve their family's circumstances. Social media platforms themselves began facing questions about their role in enabling the kind of public humiliation that had contributed to Shazmin's death. Policy experts called for better mechanisms to prevent the non-consensual sharing of private information and to protect individuals from digital harassment that could escalate into physical violence. A GoFundMe campaign established to help with Shazmin's funeral expenses quickly exceeded its goals, with donations pouring in from people across the country who had been moved by her story. The excess funds were used to establish a foundation focused on supporting families affected by domestic violence and helping children who had lost parents to violent crimes. Memorial websites dedicated to Shazmin's memory became gathering places for people to share stories about her kindness, her humor, and her dedication to her children. These digital tributes ensured that her legacy would be defined by the love she had shared rather than the violence that had ended her life. Shazmin's story reminds us that behind every headline is a human life cut tragically short. Her legacy lives on through her 5 children and the community that refuses to let her memory fade. If cases like this matter to you, subscribe to Crime Vault Stories, because every victim deserves their story told with dignity and truth. Together, we can ensure that voices like Shazmin's are never forgotten, and that justice always finds its way to those who need it most.